I feared him. That's what the thumbnail says. But the truth? It's worse. The popular list of 10 wrestlers Shawn Michaels feared the most is a complete fabrication. It never existed. What really existed was a trail of broken relationships, buried careers, real-life animosity that went far beyond the ring. This isn't about fear. This is about ego. This is about sabotage. This is about one of the most toxic locker room forces in wrestling history. So let's break down the real story. Let's talk about the 10 wrestlers who didn't make Shawn Michaels afraid. They made him angry. They made him jealous. They made him desperate to control the narrative. And in some cases, they were the only ones who could stop him from destroying everything in his path. Before we count down this list, you need to understand something important. The entire concept of Shawn Michaels fearing anyone is backwards. In the 1990s, Shawn Michaels wasn't a man gripped by fear. He was a man others feared. Not because of his in-ring ability, not because he was tough, not because he could beat you in a fight. They feared him because of his power backstage. They feared what he could do to their careers with a single conversation. They feared the Kliq. Shawn Michaels was part of the most dominant backstage group in wrestling history. Triple H, Kevin Nash, Scott Hall, Sean Waltman, and Michaels himself. Together, they controlled the room. They influenced who got pushed. They influenced who got buried. They influenced who got fired. They influenced who got opportunities and who got nothing. Michaels was at the center of it all. He had the ear of management. He had the WWF Championship. He had the stroke to end careers on a whim. So when we talk about wrestlers Michaels feared, we're really talking about something else entirely. We're talking about wrestlers he couldn't control. Wrestlers he resented, wrestlers who stood up to him, wrestlers who survived him despite his best efforts to destroy them. That's the real story here. The myth of this list comes from digital media sensationalism. Wrestling blogs and YouTube channels took stories about real conflicts and turned them into clickbait. They confused professional respect with personal terror. They mixed up Ric Flair's lists of wrestling legends with Shawn Michaels' actual history of backstage wars. Ric Flair has talked about the greatest wrestlers of all time. Names like Hulk Hogan, Stone Cold Steve Austin, Andre the Giant, Lou Thez, The Rock, and Bruno Sammartino. Those were wrestlers Flair respected. These were the legends who drew money. These were the icons who built the business. Not feared, but media outlets slap the word feared on it because it gets more clicks. Because fear is more engaging than respect. Because terror sells better than admiration. Then they applied the same logic to Michaels. They took his worst professional relationships and called them fears. They weren't fears. They were battles. Political battles, ego battles, survival battles. And Michaels wasn't the one trying to survive. He was the one doing the burying. He was the one wielding the knife. He was the one deciding who lived and who died professionally. Let's start the countdown with number 10. Number 10 is Chris Jericho. Now, Jericho is interesting because he actually had a great working relationship with Michaels later in their careers. Their 2008 feud was critically acclaimed. Wrestling analysts praised it constantly. The ladder match at No Mercy that year is considered one of the best of the decade. These matches required trust. They required chemistry. They required both men to be professionals. They required both men to check their egos at the door and focus on delivering quality. And that's exactly what they were. But here's the thing. This happened during Michaels' second career. This happened after he got sober in 2002. This happened after he reformed his image and apologized for his past behavior. This happened after he found religion. This happened after he nearly lost everything and had to rebuild himself from scratch. The Jericho feud proved something important. When Michaels wasn't a political nightmare, he could deliver incredible matches. When he wasn't trying to control everything, he could work with anyone. When he wasn't using his power to manipulate the card, he could create magic. Jericho forced Michaels to evolve. Jericho represented the new generation of technical wrestlers who demanded excellence without the backstage games. Working with Jericho meant Michaels had to abandon the politics and just perform. And he did. He delivered. He showed up. But that's not fear. That's respect earned through quality work. Jericho didn't make Michaels afraid. Jericho made Michaels better by refusing to play the old games, by insisting on professionalism, by demanding that the match be the priority, not the politics. Number 9 is John Cena. The April 2007 match between Michaels and Cena on Raw is legendary. It went 56 minutes. It was broadcast from London. It was a technical marathon that proved both men could deliver at the highest level. This wasn't a short sprint. This wasn't a quick match. This was an endurance test, a showcase of conditioning and storytelling. Cena was often criticized by hardcore fans for being limited in the ring. They called him a product of marketing. They said he couldn't wrestle. They said he only knew 5 moves. But that night, he went toe-to-toe with one of the best ever and proved his critics wrong. He showed he belonged. He showed he could hang with a legend. Michaels gave him that opportunity, not out of fear, not out of respect at first, but because by 2007, Michaels had learned his lesson. He had learned that burying people didn't make him look good. It made him look insecure. It made him look petty. It made him look like someone protecting a spot instead of building a legacy. The Cena match is proof that reformed Michaels understood something 1990s Michaels never did. Making your opponent look good makes you look better. Elevating others elevates yourself. Creating stars builds the business. Cena didn't intimidate Michaels. Cena represented the future of the company, and Michaels was smart enough by then to help build that future instead of trying to tear it down. This was cooperation. This was professional maturity. This was a veteran recognizing his role in creating the next generation. This wasn't fear. This was wisdom. Number 8 is Kurt Angle. Angle and Michaels had wrestling clinics together. WrestleMania 21 in 2005 showcased their chemistry. Their match at Vengeance that same year was even better. Some analysts consider the Vengeance match superior to the WrestleMania bout. These matches blended technical precision with storytelling. They required peak athletic performance. They required both men to be in incredible shape. They required both men to trust each other completely with complex sequences and submission holds. Angle was an Olympic gold medalist. He was one of the most naturally gifted athletes ever to enter professional wrestling. He understood leverage. He understood mat wrestling. He understood amateur technique. Working with Angle meant Michaels had to be at his absolute best. There was no room for politics. There was no room for shortcuts. There was no room for half measures. Angle demanded perfection, and Michaels delivered it. But again, this was post-2002 Michaels. This was sober Michaels. This was reformed Michaels. This was a man who had found himself again. The Angle matches prove that when Michaels focused purely on in-ring performance, he was capable of greatness. When he stopped worrying about his spot and started worrying about his craft, he delivered classics. Angle didn't scare him. Angle challenged him, and Michaels rose to that challenge because by then, he had nothing left to prove politically. He only had his legacy to build. He only had history to create. He only had moments to craft that people would remember forever. Number 7 is The Undertaker. The matches at WrestleMania 25 and 26 are considered the greatest WrestleMania matches of all time by many fans and critics. These weren't just matches. They were emotional epics. They were stories told over 30 minutes each. They told a story about respect, mortality, and legacy. They told a story about two veterans giving everything they had left. The second match was career versus streak. Michaels put his career on the line against Undertaker's undefeated WrestleMania streak, and he lost. His career ended that night. He walked away, he retired, he kept his word. These matches required extraordinary trust. They required vulnerability. They required both men to give everything they had left. The chemistry was undeniable. The storytelling was masterful. The near falls were believable. The Undertaker was one of the few wrestlers Michaels could never politically touch. Undertaker had his own power, his own respect within the company, his own protected status, his own relationship with Vince McMahon. Michaels couldn't bury him. Michaels couldn't manipulate him. Michaels couldn't control him. Michaels couldn't use the Kliq against him. With Undertaker, Michaels had to earn everything the hard way. Through performance, through storytelling, through mutual respect, through decades of professional excellence. The Undertaker didn't inspire fear in Michaels. The Undertaker inspired the best version of Michaels because there was no other option. There was no political solution. There was only the work. Number 6 is The Rock. This is where the negative history really starts to show. The relationship between Shawn Michaels and The Rock was never good. It started badly and never improved. According to reports, the animosity dated back to The Rock's teenage years. Michaels was allegedly rude to The Rock's grandmother. That disrespect created a grudge that lasted for years. It festered, it grew, it never healed. When The Rock entered the WWF, he was a third-generation superstar with natural charisma. His grandfather was a legend. His father was a legend. Wrestling was in his blood. He had everything needed to become a megastar. The look, the voice, the presence, the charisma, and the Kliq saw him as a threat. They saw him as someone who didn't need them, someone who couldn't be controlled. Michaels and Triple H reportedly tried to hold The Rock down early in his career. They tried to sabotage his push. They tried to keep him from reaching the top. They made his life difficult backstage. It didn't work. The Rock became one of the biggest stars in wrestling history despite their efforts. He transcended the business and became a global icon. He became the highest paid actor in Hollywood. He became a brand unto himself. But Michaels and The Rock never worked a major singles program together. The heat was too real. The dislike was too deep. The history was too toxic. This wasn't fear. This was a power struggle. Michaels resented The Rock's natural gifts. He resented that The Rock didn't need the Kliq's approval. He resented that The Rock succeeded despite being held down. He resented that The Rock proved you didn't need their blessing to make it. The Rock represents everything wrong with 1990s Michaels. The jealousy, the political manipulation, the attempt to control who succeeded and who failed, the gatekeeping, the insecurity masked as power. Number 5 is Hulk Hogan. SummerSlam 2005 was supposed to be a dream match. Two legends, two egos, two completely different eras colliding. The biggest star of the 1980s versus the biggest star of the 1990s. It turned into a disaster, a spectacle for all the wrong reasons. The plan was a multi-match series. Hogan and Michaels would trade victories and build a real feud. They would work house shows. They would work pay-per-views. They would make money. But Hogan refused to lose at the return match. He used his creative control clause. He used his legendary status to protect himself. He used his power to maintain his image. Michaels was furious. He felt disrespected. He felt like Hogan was putting himself above the business. He felt like Hogan was refusing to do what everyone else had to do. Lose. Put someone over. Help build the next generation. So Michaels retaliated in the most visible way possible. During their SummerSlam match, Michaels oversold everything. Every punch, every move, every moment, every single thing Hogan did. He made Hogan's offense look ridiculous. He flopped around the ring like a cartoon character. He bounced off moves like he was made of rubber. He turned the main event into a farce, into a mockery, into a joke. This was Michaels' protest. This was his way of saying he couldn't be controlled. Even by Hulk Hogan, even by the biggest name in wrestling history, even by the man who built WrestleMania. The match is remembered as one of the most awkward and uncomfortable main events ever. Michaels made sure of that. He sabotaged it deliberately. He made his point. This wasn't fear of Hogan. This was anger. This was ego. This was Michaels proving that if he couldn't win the political battle backstage, he'd win it in front of millions of viewers by making the whole thing look stupid, by embarrassing Hogan, by showing the world that Hogan couldn't work anymore. Number 4 is Vader. This story is ugly. SummerSlam 1996 WWF Championship match. Vader was a legitimate tough guy. He had been a star in Japan and WCW. He was massive. He was powerful. He was believable as a monster. He was brought into the WWF with big plans. He was supposed to win the title. The plan was for Vader to beat Michaels, lose to Bret Hart, then win it back. A proper championship run for a monster heel, a real push, a real opportunity, but it never happened. During their SummerSlam match, Vader missed a spot. Reports say it was a diving elbow drop that didn't connect right. Maybe Vader slipped. Maybe the timing was off. Maybe it was just a mistake. It happens. Wrestling is live, things go wrong. But Michaels became visibly angry. He started yelling at Vader in the middle of the match, in front of thousands of fans, in front of millions watching at home. You could see it on camera, the anger, the frustration, the disrespect. After the match, Michaels threatened Vader backstage. He made it clear there was a problem. He made it clear there would be consequences. And then the real punishment began. Vader's promised title run was canceled, erased, deleted from the plans. Instead, the championship went to Psycho Sid, a last-minute change, a political decision. Vader confirmed years later that Michaels was directly responsible for killing his push. He said it in interviews. He said it in documentaries. He said Michaels had him removed from the championship picture. One missed spot, one mistake, and Michaels used his political power to destroy what should have been the peak of Vader's WWF career. Vader was a tough guy, a legitimate fighter, someone who could probably hurt Michaels in a real fight, someone who had fought in Japan against shooters. But that didn't matter. Michaels didn't need to beat Vader in a fight. He just needed to bury him politically. And he did, easily, completely. This is the clearest example of Michaels abusing his power. This is proof that in the 1990s, Michaels wasn't afraid of anyone. Everyone else was afraid of what he could do to them, afraid of losing their spot, afraid of losing their push, afraid of being forgotten. Number 3 is Bret Hart. This is the big one. The rivalry that defined an era, the hatred that led to the Montreal Screwjob, the feud that damaged wrestling for years. Bret Hart and Shawn Michaels started as competitors, two of the best technical wrestlers in the world, both fighting to be the face of the WWF, both believing they were the superior performer, both believing they deserved to be on top. The competition was professional at first, Just two guys trying to be the best. Then it became personal. The jealousy started creeping in. The backstage politics intensified. The Kliq started protecting Michaels. Bret started feeling isolated. Then Michaels crossed the line. He made an unscripted comment referencing Bret's personal life. The Sunny Days promo. It was a deliberate attempt to cause problems in Bret's marriage. It was meant to humiliate him. Not as a character, not as a wrestler, as a man, as a husband, as a human being. Bret snapped. There were physical confrontations backstage. The two men genuinely hated each other. The heat was so real that it affected booking decisions. It affected morale. It affected the entire locker room. In February 1997, Michaels claimed he had a knee injury. He refused to work WrestleMania 13 against Bret. He said he couldn't compete. He said he needed surgery. Bret believed Michaels was faking. He believed Michaels was dodging the match. He believed Michaels was using his influence to avoid putting him over, to avoid losing. The mistrust grew. The hatred deepened. The situation became impossible. Then came Montreal. Survivor Series 1997. Bret was leaving for WCW. He had signed a contract. He was done with WWF. He refused to lose the title to Michaels in Canada, in his home country, in front of his people. Vince McMahon and Michaels orchestrated the screw job. They changed the finish without telling Bret. They called for the bell during the sharpshooter. They stole the championship from him on live television. Bret was devastated. He was humiliated. He was betrayed by his boss, by his company, by someone he thought he could trust. And Michaels was right there in the middle of it, smiling, celebrating, acting innocent, pretending he didn't know. The Hart-Michaels rivalry wasn't about fear. It was about war, personal war, professional war, a war that destroyed their relationship permanently, a war that split the locker room, a war that damaged the business, a war that created real hatred. Michaels didn't fear Bret Hart. He resented him. He was jealous of him. And ultimately, he helped destroy him. He helped orchestrate one of the most controversial moments in wrestling history. Number 2 might surprise you. It's not a wrestler most people think about in this context, but it matters. It's important to understand. It's everyone the Kliq buried. Every wrestler whose career was damaged or destroyed by Shawn Michaels and his friends. Names we'll never know. Pushes that never happened. Opportunities that vanished, stories that never got told, matches that never took place. The Kliq controlled the WWF backstage in the mid-1990s. If they didn't like you, you were done. If you didn't play their game, you went nowhere. If you challenged their authority, you were buried. If you spoke up, you were punished. Reports from that era talk about a culture of fear. Wrestlers were afraid to speak up, afraid to complain, afraid to challenge the status quo, afraid to stand up for themselves. Because crossing the Kliq meant career suicide. It meant jobbing on television. It meant losing on house shows. It meant being made to look foolish. Michaels was at the center of this. He wasn't just a member, he was the leader. The one with the most power, the one with the championship, the one who could end your career with a conversation with Vince McMahon. How many talented wrestlers never reached their potential because Michaels didn't like them? How many great matches never happened because Michaels wanted to protect his spot? How many careers were sacrificed to feed his ego? How many dreams were crushed because someone didn't fit the Kliq's vision? We'll never know the full count, but we know it happened. We know Michaels used his power to control who succeeded and who failed. We know he used political manipulation as a weapon. That's not the behavior of someone who fears others. That's the behavior of someone others fear. Someone who uses terror as a tool. Someone who maintains power through intimidation and political manipulation. Someone who creates an environment where people are afraid to be themselves. Afraid to speak up, afraid to challenge, afraid to compete. And that brings us to number 1. The wrestler Shawn Michaels supposedly feared the most. But here's the truth. The number 1 spot doesn't go to another wrestler. It goes to Shawn Michaels himself, the man in the mirror, the addict, the politician, the ego, the demon, the person he was in the 1990s. That's who Shawn Michaels should have feared the most, because that person was destroying everything: his relationships, his reputation, his body, his career, his future, his legacy. Michaels was addicted to pain pills. He was abusing his body. He was burning bridges. He was making enemies everywhere he went. He was alienating people who cared about him. The political games were catching up to him. The personal issues were spiraling out of control. His back was deteriorating. His body was breaking down. By 1998, his back was destroyed. His career was over. He had to retire. He was only in his early 30s. He should have had years left. But the addiction, the stress, the politics, the bumps all caught up, and he had to face what he'd become, a cautionary tale, a talented wrestler who let ego and addiction ruin everything good he had. The 4 years away from wrestling gave Michaels time to reflect, time to get sober, time to find religion, time to realize the damage he'd caused, time to understand how many people he'd hurt, time to see how his behavior affected everyone around him. When he came back in 2002, he was different. The stories from his second career are almost all positive. He put younger wrestlers over. He delivered classic matches without the backstage drama. He became the locker room leader people needed instead of the politician they feared. He mentored people. He helped people. He built people up instead of tearing them down. The contrast is stark. Reform Michaels proves that 1990s Michaels didn't have to be that way. He chose to be that way. He chose the politics. He chose the manipulation. He chose to use fear as a weapon. He chose ego over professionalism. And it nearly destroyed him completely. It nearly cost him everything he cared about. So let's put this all together. The list doesn't exist. Shawn Michaels never published a list of 10 wrestlers he feared, because Shawn Michaels didn't fear wrestlers. In his prime, during his most powerful years, he was the one people feared. The wrestlers on this countdown weren't his fears. They were his victims, his rivals, his political enemies, or his motivation to become better. They were obstacles. They were challenges. They were threats to his control. Vader was buried for a missed spot. Bret Hart was screwed out of the championship. Hulk Hogan was humiliated on pay-per-view. The Rock was held down until he became too big to stop. These aren't stories of Michaels being afraid. These are stories of Michaels wielding power, sometimes abusing it, sometimes weaponizing it against anyone who challenged him, sometimes using it to protect his spot at the expense of everyone else. The only exceptions are the later matches. The Undertaker, Kurt Angle, John Cena, Chris Jericho. These matches happened after Michaels reformed, after he got sober, after he learned that true legacy comes from lifting others up, not tearing them down. After he realized that the politics didn't matter. After he understood that the matches are what people remember. These matches required mutual respect. They required trust. They required Michaels to let go of the control and just perform, to just be an artist. And when he did that, he delivered some of the greatest matches in wrestling history. Matches people still talk about today. Matches that define WrestleMania. Matches that set the standard. The sensationalism of modern wrestling media created this fictional list. They took Ric Flair's rankings of legendary wrestlers and called it a fear list. They took real backstage conflicts and reframed them as respect through fear. They ignored the actual history, the actual toxicity, the actual damage Michaels caused throughout the 1990s. They rewrote history to make it more palatable, more marketable, more clickable. Why? Because Shawn Michaels' names, 10 wrestlers he feared, gets more clicks than Shawn Michaels had toxic working relationships with multiple colleagues due to addiction and political manipulation. The truth is complicated. The truth is uncomfortable. The truth doesn't fit in a thumbnail. The truth requires understanding that one of the greatest in-ring performers of all time was also one of the most difficult people to work with for nearly a decade. That his talent was undeniable, but his behavior was often unforgivable. That he had the ability to deliver 5-star matches in 5-star controversies with equal frequency. That he was both an inspiration and a warning. Here's what this countdown really reveals. Fear flows upward toward power. In the 1990s, Shawn Michaels had the power. He had the political stroke. He had the championship. He had the Kliq. He had Vince McMahon's ear. He had creative control. He had influence over booking. Nobody made him afraid because he controlled the environment. He controlled the narrative. He controlled who got opportunities. The wrestlers who appear on lists like this weren't people who scared him. They were people he couldn't fully control. Bret Hart had his own power and respect. He had his own relationship with Vince. He had his own fan base. The Undertaker was untouchable politically. He had respect from everyone. He had been there longer. He had proven his loyalty. The Rock had undeniable natural talent that overcame any attempts to bury him. He was too charismatic, too talented, too destined for greatness. Hulk Hogan had a legacy that protected him. He was bigger than the company. He was a household name. These weren't fears. These were obstacles, challenges to his control, threats to his position at the top. And Michaels responded to those threats not with fear, but with political maneuvering, backstage manipulation, and in some cases, public humiliation. He responded with power, with influence, with the Kliq. The real lesson here isn't about who Shawn Michaels feared. It's about how power corrupts, how talent alone isn't enough, how being the best in the ring doesn't excuse being the worst backstage, how success doesn't justify destroying others. Michaels had everything: the look, the ability, the charisma, the connection with fans, the talent to be the greatest of all time. But for years, he used those gifts to hurt people instead of help them. He used his position to protect his spot instead of elevating the business. He chose short-term ego satisfaction over long-term legacy building. He chose being right over being good, and it cost him. It cost him 4 years of his career. It cost him relationships that were never repaired. It cost him respect from peers who never forgave him. Some of that damage was permanent. Some bridges stayed burned. The Montreal screwjob haunted him for years. Bret Hart didn't forgive him until decades later. Even then, the forgiveness was tentative. Vader never got his career back on track. The wrestlers who were buried stayed buried. The opportunities that were stolen never came back. The what-ifs remain forever. But there's a redemption arc here. That's important to acknowledge. That's important to remember. Michaels did change. He did apologize. He did become a better person. His second career proved he could work with anyone when the politics were removed. When the ego was checked, when the priorities were right, he could deliver classics. He could make other people look good. He could be the veteran who helped instead of hurt. He could mentor instead of manipulate. The Undertaker matches happened because both men trusted each other completely, because both men cared more about the legacy than the politics. The Kurt Angle matches happened because both men demanded technical excellence, because both men wanted to be remembered for their work. The John Cena marathon happened because Michaels was willing to give 56 minutes to prove Cena belonged at that level, to elevate someone else. The Chris Jericho feud happened because both men checked their egos and focused on the work, on the craft, on the art. These are the matches we remember most. These are the matches that define his legacy now. Not the political burials, not the backstage fights, not the manipulation, not the controversies, the matches, the performances, the moments where talent and professionalism created something special, something memorable, something that transcends the business. That's the real dichotomy of Shawn Michaels. He contains multitudes, the best and the worst, the inspiration and the cautionary tale, the artist and the politician, the hero and the villain. Understanding his career requires accepting both. You can't just focus on the five-star matches and ignore the toxic behavior. You can't just focus on the 1990s controversies and ignore the 2000s redemption. Both are true. Both matter. Both shaped wrestling history. Both influence generations of wrestlers. The fictional Feared list tries to simplify this. It tries to make Michaels into just another wrestler who respected tough opponents. But that's not accurate. That's not honest. That's not the full story. The full story is messier. The full story includes the fact that for many years, Michaels was the person others feared, not the one experiencing fear. He was the threat, not the threatened. Modern wrestling fans who only know reformed Michaels might find this hard to believe. They see the legend, the showstopper, Mr. WrestleMania, the guy who delivered classic after classic in his comeback run, the Hall of Famer, the icon. But ask wrestlers who worked with him in the 1990s. Ask them privately off the record about what it was really like. Many will tell you it was a nightmare. Many will tell you they felt powerless. Many will tell you they watched careers die because Michaels decided someone wasn't worth protecting. That's the real legacy underneath the highlight reel. That's the truth beneath the mythology. Wrestling is built on myths, kayfabe, storylines, scripted realities. But backstage politics are real. The power dynamics are real. The consequences of abusing that power are real. The pain is real. And Shawn Michaels abused that power for years before finally getting control of himself and changing, before finally becoming the person he should have been all along. So when you see thumbnails claiming Shawn Michaels feared these 10 wrestlers, remember this. Remember that fear is about power. Remember that in his prime, Michaels had all the power. Remember that the wrestlers on these lists weren't his fears. They were his competition, his obstacles, his political enemies, or later, his collaborators in creating art. Some he buried, some he fought, some he respected, some he learned from, some he destroyed. But feared? No. Shawn Michaels in the 1990s didn't fear opponents. He controlled them, manipulated them, or destroyed them. The only thing he should have feared was himself, the addict, the egomaniac, the political animal who was burning down everything he'd built. The person who couldn't see past his own ego. And eventually, that caught up to him. Eventually, his body gave out. Eventually, he had to face the damage he'd caused. Eventually, he had to change or let his legacy be defined entirely by the worst parts of his character, by the politics instead of the performances. The comeback changed the narrative. It gave him a chance to rewrite the ending, to prove that people can change, to prove that redemption is possible, to prove that talent combined with maturity and professionalism can create something timeless, something that lasts. The matches with Undertaker, Angle, Cena, and Jericho did that. They proved he could still deliver at the highest level without the backstage drama. They proved he could make others look good while still looking good himself. They proved he had learned the lesson that took him years to understand. Wrestling isn't just about protecting your spot. It's about creating moments people remember forever. Moments that matter. And you can't do that alone. You need trust. You need respect. You need partners, not victims. You need collaborators, not subordinates. Reformed Michaels understood that. He embraced it, he lived it. And his second career is beloved because of it. It's celebrated, it's revered. But we can't let the redemption erase the damage. We can't let the comeback excuse the behavior. We can't rewrite history to make Michaels a hero when he was often a villain. Both exist. Both are true. Both matter to the complete story of Shawn Michaels. He's not a simple hero or villain. He's a complex human being who made terrible choices, hurt people, destroyed opportunities, and then later tried to make amends by becoming the person he should have been all along. That's a more interesting story than any fictional fear list. That's a story about consequences, growth, and the long road to redemption. It's a story about how talent isn't enough, how power corrupts, how addiction destroys, how ego blinds, and how sometimes people can find their way back from the edge and create something beautiful in the aftermath, something meaningful, something that matters. So don't believe the thumbnail. The truth is nastier and more complicated. Shawn Michaels didn't fear 10 wrestlers, but plenty of wrestlers feared what he could do backstage. They feared his influence, they feared his power, they feared being buried, they feared having their careers ended by political maneuvering. They feared being forgotten. The 10 most feared names weren't people who scared Michaels. They were people who stood up to him, resisted him, survived him, or forced him to be better. They were the obstacles he couldn't politically overcome, the rivals who had their own power, the legends he had to respect, the athletes who demanded his best work, and eventually they were the partners who helped him build the legacy he deserved. A legacy of incredible matches, a legacy of technical excellence, a legacy of storytelling mastery. That legacy exists because he finally stopped playing politics and started playing art. Because he stopped trying to control everything and started trusting his opponents. Because he stopped being the politician and became the performer. Because he stopped protecting and started creating. That's who Shawn Michaels should have been all along. And it only took losing everything to figure it out. It only took retirement, addiction, broken relationships, and 4 years away to understand what really mattered. The work, the art, the moments, not the politics, not the power, not the control, just the wrestling.